My mother smiled when she handed my brother the keys to a renovated lakeside cabin in Muskoka. Then she slid a torn folder across the table to me, the deed to a condemned maple syrup farm 2 hours north of Sudbury, tax arrears included. She leaned in so the rest of the table wouldn't hear, and told me I had until the end of the month to pay off $18,000 in back property taxes, or she'd sign the whole thing over to the township and wash her hands of me for good. I didn't cry. I picked up the pen and signed. What she didn't know was that the maple farm sat on a stretch of land the province had been quietly trying to buy for a highway expansion for 3 years, and the cabin she'd just handed my brother was about to bury him in debt he couldn't see coming. My name is Isla. I'm 31, and I work as a project coordinator for a construction firm in Barrie, Ontario. Before I get into this, if you've ever had a parent who made you feel like the consolation prize in your own family, you already know the kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather. I grew up in a house outside Aurelia where my mother, Greta, ran things the way she ran her real estate office, with spreadsheets and favorites. My father passed when I was 23, and ever since Greta had been preparing the estate, which really meant deciding, slowly and deliberately, who deserved what. My older brother Wesley was the one she decided deserved everything. He was 34, drove a leased Audi he couldn't actually afford, and called himself a private investment consultant, which as far as I could tell meant he moved money between accounts and called it strategy. His wife, Priya, had married into the family 2 years earlier and adopted my mother's hobby of finding new ways to remind me I was the disappointing daughter. The one who'd gone into construction management instead of something respectable, like Wesley's fictional finance career. It was a Sunday dinner at Greta's house in early March, the kind of gray, slush-covered Ontario evening where the roads are worse than the weather forecast admits. We were gathered supposedly to talk about settling Dad's estate properly, 2 years late. Greta had a folder for each of us. Wesley got his first, a glossy printout of the Muskoka cabin, fully renovated, dock included, appraised at just over $600,000. Priya actually gasped. Wesley kissed our mother's cheek and called her the best mother a man could ask for, which, given the context, felt like he was reading from a script he hadn't bothered to rewrite. Then Greta turned to me, and her whole face changed. The warmth just drained out of it, like she'd flipped a switch she kept reserved only for me. She said the maple farm near Sudbury, the one that had belonged to my late grandfather, was rightfully mine, since I was always the practical one, which from her mouth was never a compliment. She didn't mention the back taxes until I'd already opened the folder. $18,000, 30 days. If I couldn't pay it, she said, the township would seize it for unpaid arrears, and that would be that. No more discussion about fairness in this family, because I'd have proven I couldn't even hold on to what little I was given. Priya smirked into her wine glass. Wesley didn't even look up from his phone. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for more time. I thanked her for thinking of me, folded the papers back into the envelope, and asked for the keys to the property so I could go take a look at my inheritance. Greta blinked, clearly disappointed I hadn't given her the scene she wanted. She'd been waiting for tears. I gave her nothing. That night, driving back to my apartment in Barrie, I called the only person who still picked up when I needed advice that didn't come with strings attached. My late father's old business partner, a sharp, retired property lawyer named Howard, who'd known me since I was in diapers. I told him about the farm, the taxes, the deadline. He went quiet for a second, then asked me the address. When I gave it to him, he laughed, not a mean laugh, a genuinely surprised one. Isla, he said, that's not a maple farm. That's 80 acres sitting directly on the proposed Highway 11 bypass corridor. The province has been trying to negotiate purchase options on that stretch for 2 years. Your grandfather turned down 3 separate offers before he died because he didn't want strangers driving through his sugar bush. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time after that call. The back taxes were real, $18,000, and Greta hadn't been lying about the deadline, but she also hadn't known, or hadn't bothered to find out, what the land was actually worth. I drained half my savings and took a short-term loan against my car to cover the arrears before the deadline, telling no one, including Greta, that I'd paid it. As far as she knew, I was still scrambling, still failing, still the daughter who couldn't manage a simple inheritance. I let her believe that for exactly as long as it took me to quietly retain Howard as my lawyer and open a conversation with the Ministry of Transportation's Property Acquisitions Office. While that moved through its slow, bureaucratic motions, Greta's attention turned fully to Wesley and Priya's new cabin, and to me being, in her words, still sulking about the farm. She started inviting herself and Wesley's family up to my cabin for long weekends, which I found out about secondhand through a cousin's Instagram story. Then came the part that actually made my stomach turn. Greta decided without asking that since I was doing nothing with the Sudbury property, she and Wesley would use it as collateral. Not for anything urgent. For Wesley's new business venture, an investment consulting firm he wanted to formalize, complete with an office in downtown Toronto he absolutely could not afford on his actual income. I found out because Howard called me furious on my behalf after a title search came back showing someone had attempted to file a caveat against the property using a power of attorney document, one I had never signed. Greta had used an old, expired POA from when I'd had minor surgery years earlier and asked her to handle a few things while I recovered. She and Wesley had taken that document to a private lender, claiming it was still valid, to try to secure a line of credit against my land. That was the moment something in me went very still and very clear. I didn't call Greta to confront her. I didn't post about it, didn't vent to Priya's sister who I knew would carry gossip straight back to the house. I drove to Howard's office in Barrie the next morning and we spent 4 hours going through everything: the expired POA, the fraudulent caveat attempt, the original deed, my grandfather's old correspondence with the province. Howard had handled enough family estate disasters in his career to know exactly how to build a case quietly, without tipping anyone off before it mattered. 2 months later, the Ministry of Transportation's offer came through. $840,000 for the 80 acres, full buyout, corridor rights included. Howard negotiated it up from their opening number by nearly $90,000, mostly because I refused to sign anything until the fraudulent caveat attempt was formally on record with the Land Registry Office. Which meant Greta and the lenders she'd approached were now, officially, part of a documented fraud attempt against a ministry transaction. I didn't tell my mother any of this. I let her keep believing I was the failure, right up until the Thanksgiving dinner 4 months after that Sunday in March, when Wesley's investment firm collapsed spectacularly. Turned out the line of credit he'd secured using my supposedly worthless farm as informal leverage. The lender hadn't actually waited for the caveat to clear before advancing him a chunk of cash. Had gone straight into a crypto arbitrage scheme that fell apart over a single weekend. He owed the lender close to $200,000 personally, with the cabin itself now exposed because he'd also quietly remortgaged it as collateral for the same venture, something he hadn't told Greta or Priya. The lender's lawyers came after the fraudulent POA attempt as part of building their case against Wesley for misrepresenting the collateral he'd offered, which dragged my mother into a fraud inquiry she had absolutely not seen coming. The Ontario Provincial Police's Financial Crimes Unit got involved once the falsified power of attorney surfaced in the lender's file. I remember exactly where I was when Howard called to tell me, standing in the cereal aisle of a no-frills in Barrie, completely unbothered, like I'd been waiting for that call for months without realizing it. Greta found out, eventually, what the farm had actually sold for. She found out from a neighbor, not from me, which I think bothered her more than the number itself. By then, I'd already closed on a small house outside Barrie with a paid-off mortgage and a separate investment account Howard had helped me set up. Money my mother had once handed me as a punishment, now sitting somewhere she could never touch. She called me on a Tuesday evening in November. I almost didn't pick up. When I did, she didn't apologize, not really. She just asked, in a voice I'd never heard her use with me before, careful and almost small, why I hadn't told her about the highway offer. I told her the truth. I told her she was the one who'd called the farm worthless to my face, who'd tried to use a fake power of attorney to leverage my own land for her favorite child's failed business, who had never once in 31 years asked what I actually wanted out of life before deciding what I deserved. She didn't have a response to that. For the first time I could remember, my mother had nothing to say. Wesley and Priya lost the cabin in February. The bank repossessed it after the remortgage came due, and the OPP investigation made the lender unwilling to extend anything further. Last I heard, they were renting a basement apartment in Barrie, the same city I live in, though we haven't run into each other and I'm not in a hurry to. My mother still calls sometimes. I still answer, mostly. We don't talk about the farm, or the cabin, or the years before that when she made it very clear which of her children she'd actually chosen. Some things you can forgive without forgetting, and some things you just learn to hold at a careful distance, the way you'd hold a glass that's already been cracked once. The land is gone now, swallowed into a highway corridor that locals still complain about online, not knowing the 80 acres underneath it once belonged to my grandfather, and, for one strange, quiet winter, to me. I drive past the construction sometimes on my way north. I never feel sad about it. I just think about how certain my mother was that she'd handed me nothing, and how wrong she turned out to be about almost everything that mattered.